breathing. So you take a breath, because that's what you're going to need to survive. Let's say you take a deep breath through your mouth. And you take another deep breath through your nose. Now you might think these are two totally different ways of getting in oxygen. Then you couldn't be more wrong. But anyways, that's how it looks when you look at the difference between a mouth and a nose. You're totally right by saying they don't look the same to each other. But the truth is that if you follow the path of oxygen, which is the main thing that we are going to discuss in this video, and take a deep look inside your mouth and nose, then you will see there is no difference in how the nose and the mouth takes oxygen into your body. So the air is going to go into the back of the throat, where it is called the larynx, no matter which way you take oxygen inside your lungs, either your nose or your mouth. So here we have air coming in from the nose. It enters through your nasal cavity and into the larynx. And here you have air coming in from the mouth, which also gonna end up in the larynx with the air that comes from the nose. Then they start to enter a deep, large intersection called the trachea. Then they go down towards this thing that we call Adam's apple. So basically the Adam's apple is a pretty cool structure in the middle of your throat, and everybody has it, not just men. Women have it too. And the reason it's called an Adam's apple is because Adam is genuinely a man's or a boy's name, and since men have deeper voice than women, then their Adam apples tend to be larger and more noticeable than they are in women. You can try to feel it by touching the middle of your neck. In many cases, it is easier for men than women to spot the Adam apple. The main function of this structure is to help you control your voice and block any threatening junk or food particles that are mistakenly thrown into your respiratory passage, which can potentially choke you. And of course, you don't want to have rotting food inside your lungs. We occasionally cough out whatever it is, a piece of faulty food or water, and that is what the laryngeal structure does to keep stuffs away from blocking the air to your lungs, which can make you suffocate and die. We have just talked about all the cool things about the Adam apple, and now air keeps on moving through the laryngeal structure and enters the deep, large tube that leads air directly into your lungs, and it is called the trachea. Air is just going to keep falling down into the lung area. So it's the lungs. It's been going down the trachea, and there goes the two massive spongy chunks of meat that we call the lungs. This is the left lung, and this is the right lung. You can see that the lungs actually don't look symmetrical like you think they are. But they look slightly different. The biggest difference between two lungs is how many lobes they have. Your right lung has 3 separate lobes, which are called the superior lobe or the upper lobe, the middle lobe and the inferior lobe or the lower lobe. But your left lung only has 2 lobes, the upper and the lower lobe. And the other significant difference is that you actually have this thing in the middle slightly to the left that your left lung takes up the most, which is called the cardiac notch. This thing right here. And the reason we call it that is that it's a little negative space that gets formed because the heart is literally peeking out of here. And as a result, it kind of makes a void in the lungs as the heart develops. This is our heart. And this is the cardiac notch we're talking about. Now, around these lungs, you've got ribs. So you've got ribs here, and between the ribs, you've got rib muscles. And they are, of course, on both sides. Below the lungs and below the heart, there is a big muscle. This structure forms below your upper organs and above your intestines. And guess what? It basically looks like a floor. So the heart and the 2 lungs, they sit on this floor made up of this muscle. And this muscle is called the diaphragm. So this diaphragm muscle makes up the floor. The ribs make up the walls or a bird cage that keeps your lungs and hearts in place, which is referred to the nice wicking execution method called the blood eagle. And what they did is that they actually chop your rib cage open and pull out your lungs like freeing a bird. I'm not gonna go out of context and go into details here. So anyways, what do we have? We have basically a room. We have a giant room with walls and a floor. And this entire room we actually call the thorax. So again, in this room, you have your 2 lungs and your heart. Nice. But we still haven't got into knowing where the air goes inside our lungs. So this is kind of what it would look like. You've got all this mildly interesting interior. You might think right now this structure looks really complicated, but the easiest way to think about this is probably to imagine a tree. So this is a tree, and that tree has been flipped upside down. So you've got all these branches off that tree, and they're branching and branching into even more tiny little microscopic branches. The inside of our lungs basically look like an upside-down tree. And they even call this entire structure a bronchial tree or bronchial tubes. In the middle, you've got this nice trunk. Imagine this is the trunk of a tree. And then it starts kind of branching from there. So air goes down this main trunk called the trachea. And then it kind of starts splitting up into numerous bronchial tubes. Now let's move on with the path of the air. So let's say when we look really closely into the ends of the branches of the bronchial tree until it's microscopic, until it's invisible to naked eyes but under a microscope, and it would look like this. These things basically look like a bunch of little sacs. And we call these the alveoli, and it functions kind of similarly to what's happening on the leaf of a plant, which is what we're going to talk about shortly. Again, those alveolus, they're where the air partially ends up inside your lungs. These alveolus have dead ends, which makes the air circulate around, expanding it, and goes all the way back out of your mouth when you exhale. So that's how it all comes together. The air goes all the way in through your mouth down to the alveoli, turns back, and then goes all the way out of your body. But while it does that before oxygen leaves your lungs, we can zoom into the alveoli and see an entire different thing happening in there. The alveoli is surrounded by tiny blood vessels. And what will happen is that some oxygen will actually go into the blood. And out of the blood will be the waste from your body that we call CO2. So you'll have some carbon dioxide that the cells in your body have been making the whole time. And that waste actually then gets disposed into the alveoli. And yet we're going to see the similarities between how plants breathe and the previously discussed respiratory system in animals. Now, the process of respiration in plants involves using the sugars produced during photosynthesis plus oxygen to produce energy for plant growth. But in many ways, respiration is the complete opposite of photosynthesis. In the natural environment, plants produce their own food to survive, while photosynthesis takes place in the leaves and stems only. Respiration occurs in the leaves, stems, and roots of the plant. They use a carbon dioxide from the environment to produce sugars, or we might say glucose, and of course, oxygen, which can later be utilized as a source of energy. And this is where the stomata is in charge. The stomata are responsible for gas exchange such as CO2 and O2. They are mostly found on the undersurface of plant leaves. Air enters the plant through these openings. The carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. Some of the oxygen produced is used in respiration. Surplus oxygen exits through these same openings. At meantime, water vapor goes into the atmosphere through these pores in a process called transpiration. In short, we are basically done talking about how oxygen gets inside your body and how carbon dioxide gets thrown back out. And how carbon dioxide is absorbed into plants and oxygen gets thrown back out. So on and so forth. And that is how breathing works.